What salvation looks like in the 21st century. Jesus is God, and His Holy Spirit is the only spirit you need to open yourself to, and any opposing spirit will harm you until you know the truth of the Ten Commandments and recognize the authority of Jesus. When I was a child, I had an afterlife experience, and I know heaven is real, as I met my grandfather who had passed away before I was born, and I know we are blessed as we walk with God on this beautiful earth of God's creation on our journey to a place of our innermost longings. Many people think there is a mysterious place they go to when they die. Jesus went to this place for 3 days, and it is called Sheol, and in the Bible, it is referred to as the grave, but our spirit goes back to God. The Holy Spirit has been at work in the world for 2,000 years throughout the history of salvation, and throughout the whole history of the Jewish people, and now we live in a time that is closer to paradise than ever witnessed before. But we think we are living in oppression and misery, but all we need to change is our mindset. The difference between a spiritual society and a temporal society is what I experienced in Australia during the 1980s and 1990s, especially in small towns such as mine. The churches were always full on the weekends, and the main street on a Saturday morning was the most magical place. You would see people you knew and you would be filled with joy, and you'd see friends from school and their parents, and it would always be the most wonderful experience. The shops were not highly polished and refined, as they are today, and they were not filled with Chinese manufactured products made for Chinese people, but they were owned and operated by people who knew what the customer wanted, and if they didn't have it, then they would get it in, at no extra cost, or tell you which other shop to go to, and you could wait for it as long as you had to, and you knew you would always get what you wanted. The shops were all very different and very unique, and the shopkeepers were either strange or incredible characters, and you highly respected some of them and feared others. One thing you would hear from people is that they would say, "I met so and so down the street and they snobbed me." This happens because people can't wave back to you because their hands are full, or they've had a bad day, or they are only usually nice to you in front of their boss, and you could get to know people's real relationship with you through your interactions down the main street. But these days, when a person gets snobbed, they just assume the person hates them. As someone who has walked in the Spirit, on occasion, I know that a temporal person cannot understand you, and you need to express yourself in a spiritual way to a spiritual person such as a religious one. Living in the fallen state is more common to the average person, and our society protects you and enables you to work and function, but the meaning of life is a healthy relationship with God. The important things to consider when wishing to be in a spiritual state are the precepts of the Jewish people, the 10 Commandments, and the spiritual presentation of those commandments by Jesus. These things need to be known and respected before entering into the freedom of the Spirit, and you need to be mindful of them all the time, and Jesus said you can do this by simply loving God and neighbor. Another easy thing that the Spirit of Jesus does for us is to say we are saved by simply professing our faith in Him. But we need to have knowledge, and as we live in a Christian dominated world, we already have that knowledge from our upbringing and environment. St. Peter says we must crave pure spiritual milk, like infants who need to gradually grow in their spiritual strength and resilience, and it is Jesus who gives you this strength and resilience. We are to be open to the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of God as presented in the Bible and witnessed to us in church. The following are the considerations for salvation in the 21st century. 1. You must curb your enthusiasm and not get overexcited about the awesomeness and total joy and freedom of living in the Spirit. 2. You must sleep properly. 3. You must eat properly. 4. You must work properly. 5. You must not enter into delusion, as this is unsafe. The scientific phenomenon of simple harmonic motion can be applied to the way things can occur in your everyday life. 3 things like 1. Coincidence, an example is the fashion industry, and 2. Conspiracy, an example is the Apollo conspirators, and 3. The witnessing of little miracles in our lives and environment, an example is when you have miraculously cheated death. These things can be understood by understanding the scientific observation of resonance and the effect of it through our media, our population, our learnt experiences, and our natural environment, and conclusions based on our logical and informed perceptions. 6. You must realize that the more things in your life and your environment that you want to change, the harder and more frustrating your mission becomes. 7. You must look at life in regard to Jesus and his conquest over Satan, instead of looking at good and evil, which can be interchangeable, and right and wrong, which can be interchangeable, or positive and negative, which can be interchangeable. 8. You must know that by living the precepts of God's people that you will be able to obey secular law and conduct your affairs honestly and profitably. If you do not have the right attitude to your living skills, things can go badly for you when you are an infant in the spiritual, and you must not be distressed, and you must trust in the love and truth of Jesus. Looking at the true story of Jesus, both as him being human and as him being the second person of the Holy Trinity, gives you the perspective of the temporal and the spiritual, and looking at Satan as merely an opponent to God gives you the ability to discern universal truth and communicate with like-minded people. Understanding the spirit of Satan from Jesus' perspective is important because we all oppose God at some time, as we are human, and we put ourselves first in certain situations, and we worship ourselves in certain situations, and we worship idols in certain situations. But always remember that Jesus defeated Satan at the resurrection. Idols are what we create for ourselves for our own purposes and pleasure, and Yahweh is inherently different to all of them. A typical example of a 21st century idol is Amy Winehouse, who was a very real person and a very expressive and brilliant musician. She wrote songs and she performed them, and she had to perform them to a standard over and over again. She had compromised relationships in her life, and she could only comfort herself and sedate herself with alcohol, and as she entered the music industry in America, she comforted herself and sedated herself, and then stimulated herself with drugs. Under this paradigm of drug addiction and alcohol addiction, she was able to function as someone who could reproduce her art over and over again, but like so many idols that humans have created, she was destroyed.